Elena Martinez had always been invisible to the powerful men who ruled the city's underground. She worked as a waitress at Rossi's, an upscale Italian restaurant that served as a front for the most dangerous crime family in Chicago. Every evening, she watched from behind the bar as Marco Benedetti, the feared Mafia boss, conducted his business in the private dining room. Marco was everything the stories said he was. Tall, imposing, with dark eyes that could freeze a person's blood and hands that had ended more lives than anyone cared to count. At 35, he commanded respect through fear, and his word was law in the criminal underworld. Women threw themselves at his feet, hoping to catch his attention and secure a place in his dangerous but luxurious world. Elena was different. She kept her head down, served his drinks quietly, and never lingered longer than necessary. While other waitresses flirted shamelessly with his men, hoping to climb the social ladder, Elena focused on her work. She had goals that didn't involve getting tangled up with criminals. She was saving money to finish her nursing degree, sending whatever she could to her sick mother back in Mexico, and trying to build a legitimate life. Her indifference wasn't planned or calculated. She simply had no interest in a man whose power came from violence and intimidation. When Marco's cold gaze occasionally fell on her, she met it with polite professionalism and nothing more. She didn't giggle when he spoke, didn't blush when he looked her way, and didn't compete for his attention like the others did. This lack of response puzzled Marco more than he cared to admit. He was used to women falling at his feet, used to commanding attention wherever he went. Elena's complete disregard for his status was something entirely new. She treated him like any other customer, no more, no less. When she brought him his usual whiskey, her hands never trembled, her voice never wavered, and her eyes never lingered on his face. One evening in late September, a rival gang attempted to muscle in on Marco's territory. The meeting at Rossi's turned violent when gunmen burst through the front door. In the chaos that followed, tables overturned, customers screamed, and bullets flew across the dining room. Elena, who had been clearing tables near the back, found herself caught in the crossfire. Instead of running or hiding like everyone else, she moved with surprising calm. When she saw one of Marco's men bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound to the shoulder, she didn't hesitate. Using her nursing training, she applied pressure to the wound and helped drag him behind the bar to safety. Her hands moved quickly and confidently as she worked to stop the bleeding, completely focused on saving a life rather than on her own danger. Marco, who had taken cover behind an overturned table, watched in amazement as this quiet waitress risked her own safety to help his wounded soldier. When the shooting stopped and his enemies lay dead or fled, he found Elena still tending to the injured man, her white uniform stained with blood, her face set with determination. "You should have run," Marco told her later that night as the police finished their investigation and the restaurant was finally cleared. Elena looked up from washing blood from her hands. "He would have died. I couldn't let that happen. You don't even know him. He's just one of my men." She dried her hands carefully. "He's a human being. That's enough." Her simple answer stuck with Marco long after that night. In his world, loyalty was bought with money or enforced through fear. The idea that someone would risk themselves for a stranger with no expectation of reward or protection was completely foreign to him. Elena had shown more courage and compassion in those few minutes than most people in his organization displayed in years of service. Over the following weeks, Marco found himself paying more attention to Elena. Not in an obvious way that would embarrass or frighten her, but with the careful observation of a man accustomed to reading people. He noticed how she never accepted tips that seemed too large, suspecting they might come from dirty money. He saw how she always had kind words for the elderly customers and never lost patience with difficult ones. Elena remained completely unaware of his increased attention. She continued her routine, working her shifts efficiently and professionally. When Marco tried to engage her in conversation beyond the necessary pleasantries, She responded politely but briefly. She never asked about his business, never showed curiosity about his wealth or power, and never tried to extend their interactions beyond what was required. Her older co-worker, Maria, often teased her about missing opportunities. "Do you know who that man is? What he could do for you? Girls would kill to be in your position." Elena would just shake her head. "I'm not interested in that kind of life. I have my own plans." Those plans became clearer to Marco when he overheard Elena on the phone with her mother's doctor. She was discussing payment arrangements for ongoing cancer treatments, her voice steady despite the obvious stress. He learned that she sent most of her earnings home and worked extra shifts whenever possible. Her goals were simple but admirable: help her family, finish her education, and build an honest life. This revelation only deepened Marco's fascination. In his experience, everyone had a price. Everyone could be bought or intimidated. Elena seemed to exist outside these rules. She had real problems, real financial pressures, and he could solve them all with a simple gesture. Yet she never asked for his help, never even hinted that she might welcome his assistance. The more Elena ignored him, the more intrigued Marco became. He began finding excuses to visit the restaurant more often, always requesting tables in her section. He tried different approaches, sometimes being charming, sometimes more direct. But Elena's response never changed. She remained courteous, professional, and completely unmoved by his presence. Other women in the restaurant noticed Marco's attention and grew jealous. They couldn't understand what made Elena special or why she seemed so uninterested in such a powerful man. Some tried to warn her that ignoring Marco Benedetti could be dangerous, but Elena simply smiled and continued doing her job. As autumn turned to winter, Marco's interest evolved into something more complex. What had started as curiosity about her indifference grew into genuine respect for her character. He found himself thinking about her strength, her compassion, and her unwavering moral compass. These were qualities he rarely encountered in his dark world. Elena, meanwhile, remained focused on her goals. She was getting closer to having enough money to return to school, and her mother's treatments were showing promising results. The last thing she wanted was to complicate her life by getting involved with a dangerous man, no matter how powerful or wealthy he might be. But Marco Benedetti was not a man who accepted rejection easily, and Elena Martinez was about to discover that some forces are much harder to ignore than others. Winter brought changes that Elena couldn't have predicted. Marco's visits to the restaurant became a regular pattern, and with them came an uncomfortable shift in the atmosphere. Other customers began to notice the attention she received from the notorious crime boss, and whispers followed her wherever she went in the neighborhood. Elena tried to maintain her normal routine, but it became increasingly difficult to ignore the implications of Marco's interest. His men started appearing at the restaurant even when he wasn't there, always requesting tables in her section. They were polite and tipped generously, but their presence made Elena uneasy. She felt like she was being watched, evaluated, and judged by standards she didn't understand. The breaking point came on a snowy evening in December. Elena was walking home from her evening shift when a black sedan pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing Marco in the back seat. "Get in," he said simply. "We need to talk." Elena stopped walking but didn't approach the car. "Mr. Benedetti, I appreciate your business at the restaurant, but I don't think we have anything to discuss." Marco's expression darkened. In his world, people didn't refuse his invitations. "Elena, I'm not asking. There are things you need to understand about your situation." The implied threat in his words sent a chill through Elena that had nothing to do with the cold wind. She realized that her attempts to remain invisible had failed completely. Like it or not, she was now on Marco Benedetti's radar, and that put her in a dangerous position. Reluctantly, she got into the car. The interior was warm and luxurious, a stark contrast to the harsh winter night outside. Marco studied her face as the car pulled away from the curb. "You've been working at Rossi's for 2 years," he began, his voice calm but intense. "In that time, you've never asked for favors, never tried to get close to me or my men, never shown any interest in the benefits that could come from association with my family?" Elena kept her eyes fixed on her hands. "I told you before. I have my own plans." "Your plans." Marco leaned back against the leather seat. "Nursing school, taking care of your mother, building an honest life." He paused, letting her absorb the fact that he knew these details. Admirable goals, Elena, but naive ones. There's nothing naive about wanting to help people and live honestly. In this city, in this neighborhood, you can't remain neutral forever. Everyone has to choose a side eventually. Elena finally looked at him directly. "I'm not choosing any side. I'm not part of your world, Mr. Benedetti." Marco's laugh was low and without humor. "You became part of my world the moment you saved Tony's life. You showed loyalty and courage that my own soldiers rarely display. That kind of character doesn't go unnoticed. I was just doing what anyone would do." "No, Elena. Most people would have run. You stayed and risked yourself for someone you barely knew. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." The car stopped in front of Elena's modest apartment building. Marco's driver remained silent in the front seat, giving them privacy to talk. "What do you want from me?" Elena asked quietly. Marco's dark eyes searched her face. "I want you to understand that your life changed that night in September. Whether you like it or not, you're under my protection now. That comes with benefits, but it also comes with expectations. I didn't ask for your protection. You didn't have to ask. I'm giving it to you anyway." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Your mother's medical bills have been taken care of. Your tuition for nursing school has been paid in full. You can quit the restaurant job and focus on your studies." Elena's stomach dropped. "You can't just... I didn't ask you to." "I don't need your permission to help you, Elena. I do what I want. When I want." Marco's tone softened slightly. "But I'm not doing this to trap you. I'm doing it because you deserve better than struggling paycheck to paycheck while you try to save the world one person at a time. And what do you expect in return?" Marco was quiet for a long moment. "Your friendship, your trust, your presence in my life." Elena felt the weight of his words. In the criminal world, nothing came without a price, and she suspected that Marco's definition of friendship might be very different from hers. "Mr. Benedetti, I appreciate your generosity, but I can't accept it. I need to earn my own way." Marco's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice anymore, Elena. I've already made the arrangements. Your mother's treatments continue, your school is paid for, and you're free to pursue your dreams. Fighting me on this will only make things more difficult for everyone involved." The threat was subtle but clear. Elena realized she was caught in a web she never intended to enter. By saving one man's life, she had somehow entangled herself with the most dangerous crime family in the city. Over the following weeks, Elena discovered the extent of Marco's intervention in her life. Her mother's oncologist called to confirm that all future treatments were covered by an anonymous benefactor. The nursing school contacted her about a full scholarship that had suddenly become available. Even her landlord mentioned that her rent had been paid months in advance. Elena tried to return to her normal routine, but everything had changed. She quit her job at the restaurant, as Marco had clearly expected her to do. Without the daily grind of work, she had more time to study, but she also had more time to think about her complicated situation. Marco began appearing in her life with increasing frequency. He would send flowers to her apartment, always with simple cards that read, "Thinking of you." He arranged for a newer, safer car to replace her unreliable old one, claiming it was for her protection. When she protested these gestures, he dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. "I take care of the people who matter to me," he would say. "You matter to me, Elena." What troubled Elena most was that Marco never demanded anything inappropriate from her. He didn't try to force physical intimacy or treat her like his property. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in her as a person. He asked about her studies, remembered details about her family, and listened when she talked about her dreams of becoming a nurse. This respectful approach made Elena's situation even more confusing. She had expected a man like Marco to be crude and demanding. Instead, he was patient, intelligent, and surprisingly thoughtful. His attention was flattering in ways she didn't want to admit, even to herself. But Elena couldn't forget who Marco really was. She read the newspapers and heard the stories. She knew about the violence, the corruption, and the lives destroyed by his organization. No matter how charming or generous he might be with her, she couldn't ignore the blood on his hands. The internal conflict began to wear on Elena. She found herself thinking about Marco more often than she wanted to admit. When he didn't contact her for several days, she caught herself wondering where he was and what he was doing. When he did appear, she felt a mixture of relief and anxiety that confused her. Elena's friends at school noticed her distraction. They asked about the mysterious benefactor who had paid for her education and the expensive gifts that occasionally appeared at her apartment. Elena deflected their questions, unable to explain her complicated situation without revealing dangerous secrets. As winter turned to spring, Marco's patience began to show signs of strain. He had given Elena space, respected her boundaries, and provided for her needs without asking for anything in return. But Elena could sense his growing frustration with her continued emotional distance. The tension reached a breaking point when Elena mentioned that she had been asked on a date by a fellow nursing student named David. She had casually mentioned it during one of Marco's visits, not thinking it would matter to him. The change in Marco's demeanor was immediate and terrifying. His dark eyes went cold, and the air in the room seemed to thicken with unspoken danger. "You're not going out with him?" Marco said quietly, his voice carrying the lethal authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. Elena felt a flash of anger override her fear. "You don't get to decide who I spend time with." "I decide everything that concerns your safety, and this boy is not safe for you to be around." "David is a perfectly nice person. He's studying to be a paramedic." Marco stood up from the chair where he had been sitting, his imposing presence filling the small room. "Elena, you will not see this man again. End of discussion." For the first time since their relationship began, Elena saw the ruthless crime boss that everyone feared. The patient gentleman who had been courting her was gone, replaced by someone who expected immediate and unquestioning compliance. Elena realized that the comfortable illusion of choice she had been living under was exactly that, an illusion. Marco Benedetti had claimed her as his own, and he had no intention of sharing her with anyone else. Elena's defiance of Marco's order marked the beginning of a dangerous game that neither of them fully understood. Despite his warning, she went on the date with David, driven by a need to reclaim some control over her own life. It was a simple coffee meeting, innocent and brief, but Elena knew that Marco would find out. In his world, information traveled fast, and his reach extended into every corner of the city. She was right. Within hours of returning home, Elena found Marco waiting in her apartment. He sat in her living room chair like a king on his throne, his presence both magnetic and terrifying. The apartment felt smaller with him in it, the walls closing in around her. "Did you enjoy your evening?" His voice was deceptively calm, but Elena could see the storm brewing behind his dark eyes. Elena lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "Yes, I did. David is kind and intelligent. He treats me like an equal, not like property." The words hit Marco like physical blows. His jaw tightened and his hands clenched into fists before he forced himself to relax. Property? Is that what you think this is about? Isn't it? You pay my bills, control my movements, and decide who I can spend time with. What else would you call it? Marco stood slowly, his movement controlled but predatory. I call it protection. I call it caring. I call it love. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Elena felt her breath catch. This was the first time Marco had openly declared his feelings, and the intensity in his voice left no doubt about his sincerity. Love doesn't demand ownership, Elena said softly. Love doesn't threaten and control. In my world, it does. Marco stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. In my world, when you love someone, you protect them from everything, even if they don't understand the danger they're in. What danger? David is a nursing student, not a rival gangster. Marco's laugh was bitter. You think this is about him? Elena, you're so innocent you don't even see what's happening around you. Do you know how many enemies I have? Do you know what they would do to you if they discovered how much you mean to me? The revelation struck Elena like lightning. She had been so focused on maintaining her independence that she hadn't considered how Marco's enemies might view her. In their twisted logic, anyone Marco cared about would be a target, a weakness to exploit. That's exactly why we can't do this, Elena said, her voice breaking slightly. Your world is too dangerous. I can't live in constant fear. You don't have to fear anything as long as you're with me. But when you run off with other men, when you ignore my protection, you put yourself at risk. Marco's voice grew harder. And that's something I cannot allow. Over the following days, Elena discovered the full extent of Marco's jealousy. David stopped calling and avoided her at school. When she finally confronted him, he was pale and nervous, clearly frightened. Elena, I like you, but I can't see you anymore. Some men came to my apartment. They didn't hurt me, but they made it very clear that continuing to date you would be unhealthy. Elena felt sick. She realized that Marco's love was becoming a prison, not just for her, but for anyone who tried to get close to her. The gentle, patient man who had courted her was gone, replaced by a possessive force that would destroy anything that threatened his claim on her. But something unexpected was happening to Elena as well. The more Marco fought for her, the more she began to see the depth of his feelings. His jealousy, while frightening, came from a place of genuine emotion. This powerful man who controlled an empire was completely vulnerable when it came to her. She had become his weakness, his obsession, his one point of humanity in a world of violence and betrayal. Elena found herself drawn to this vulnerability even as she fought against his control. When Marco looked at her, she saw past the crime boss to the man underneath. Lonely, desperate for real connection, and terrified of losing the one person who had shown him authentic goodness. The crisis came when a rival family decided to use Elena as leverage against Marco. They had been watching his movements, noting his frequent visits to her apartment, and they correctly identified her as his weak point. Elena was leaving the hospital after a clinical rotation when 3 men grabbed her, forcing her into a van in broad daylight. She was taken to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where she met Vincent Torino, the head of a competing crime family. Vincent was older than Marco, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that held no warmth or mercy. "Miss Martinez," Vincent said as his men tied her to a chair, "you're going to help me send a message to Marco Benedetti. He's been encroaching on my territory, and it's time he learned the consequences." Elena's fear was real, but underneath it was something else. Anger. These men had pulled her into their world without her consent, made her a pawn in their violent games. She thought of Marco, probably frantic with worry by now, and realized that she cared about him far more than she had admitted to herself. The warehouse door exploded inward 6 hours later. Marco entered like an avenging angel, flanked by a dozen of his most trusted soldiers. The gunfight that followed was brief, but brutal. When the smoke cleared, Vincent's men were dead or dying, and Vincent himself knelt before Marco with a gun to his head. Elena had never seen Marco like this before. His usual control was completely gone, replaced by a primal fury that was both magnificent and terrifying. This was the man who had clawed his way to the top of the criminal hierarchy, who commanded absolute loyalty through a combination of fear and respect. "You touched her," Marco said to Vincent, his voice barely human. "You put your hands on what belongs to me." "Marco, please," Vincent gasped. "It was just business. Nothing personal." "Everything about her is personal to me." Marco's finger tightened on the trigger. "Everything." Elena watched from her chair, still tied but no longer afraid. She saw Marco in his true element, saw the lengths he would go to protect her, and she finally understood the depth of his obsession. She wasn't just someone he wanted, she was someone he needed, someone worth risking everything for. "Marco," she called softly. Her voice cut through his rage like a knife, bringing him back from the edge of violence. "I'm all right, let's go home." Marco looked at her then, and Elena saw tears in his eyes. This powerful man, this feared crime boss, was crying with relief at her safety. He untied her personally, his hands gentle despite their trembling, and held her close as if she might disappear. In the car afterward, as they drove through the city streets, Elena made her decision. She had seen both sides of Marco now, the patient suitor and the dangerous predator. She understood that loving him meant accepting both aspects of his nature. "I can't date other people," she said suddenly. "Not because you forbid it, but because I don't want to. I want to be with you, Marco, all of you, including the parts that scare me." Marco stopped the car abruptly, pulling over to look at her. "Elena, you don't know what you're saying. My world is dangerous. There will always be enemies, always be threats. Then we'll face them together." Elena reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "But no more controlling me. No more making decisions for me. If we're going to do this, we do it as equals." Marco stared at her for a long moment, then brought her hand to his lips. "You'll be my queen, not my prisoner. I promise you that. And you'll be my choice, not my captor." From that night forward, their relationship changed completely. Elena moved into Marco's heavily guarded mansion, but she kept her apartment and her independence. She finished nursing school and began working at a hospital that treated victims of violence, many of them casualties of the very world she now inhabited. Marco's obsession with Elena never diminished, but it evolved. Instead of trying to control her every movement, he channeled his protectiveness into making her stronger. He taught her to defend herself, surrounded her with loyal bodyguards, and gave her the resources to help the victims she encountered in her work. Elena, in turn, brought out the humanity in Marco. She couldn't change what he was, but she could influence how he exercised his power. Under her influence, Marco's organization began operating with a code of ethics that was rare in the criminal world. They avoided harming innocents, protected women and children, and focused their violence only on those who chose to live by the sword. Together, they created something neither had expected, a love story that thrived in the darkness, a partnership that combined Elena's moral compass with Marco's ruthless protection. Elena had become Marco's obsession, but he had become hers as well. They were bound together by choice now, two people who had found in each other the missing pieces of their souls. In the end, Elena never did become invisible again. As Marco Benedetti's woman, she commanded respect and fear throughout the city. But she was no longer the ignored waitress serving drinks in the shadows. She had become a force in her own right, a queen who ruled alongside her king in the dangerous world they had chosen to inhabit together. Their love story became legend in the criminal underworld, proof that even the darkest hearts could find redemption in the right person's arms, and that sometimes the most powerful obsessions are the ones that transform rather than destroy. Elena Martinez had captured the heart of the most dangerous man in Chicago, and in doing so, she had discovered the true extent of her own strength and courage. Marco Benedetti had found in Elena not just an obsession, but salvation. And Elena had learned that love, real love, sometimes requires accepting the darkness along with the light, embracing the danger along with the safety, and choosing to stand beside someone not because they're perfect, but because they're perfectly yours.